大家好啊，今天是2024年的12月24号。今天给大家分享彭博社高盛的分享啊，在分享中呢，他主要提到了房价和关税对股市的影响。
Bring in Sefu, China portfolio strategist at Goldman Sachs. Thanks very much for joining us this morning, and just want to touch on essentially what that story is telling us. Yes, it's the Panama Canal, and we're talking about sort of tensions between Beijing and Washington being felt in Central America. Maybe not so much expected, but what does that tell you then about the outlook ahead for Sino-US relations? And again, how is that going to really have a bearing on the outlook for equity markets in mainland China as well?
Yeah. Definitely, the U.S.-China relations is an important factor that will influence the equity market performance. We think for next year, there are two major factors. One is domestic policies. The other is definitely U.S.-China relations. Well, from the equity market perspective, so far most of investors are focusing on tariff. So the trade relations is the key focus now. We have done some estimation, basically assuming a 20% tariff hike that we estimate will have 3% earnings drag to MSCI China and around 7% valuation compression. So that will definitely have some impact, but to some extent, we think domestic policy easing will offset some of the negative impact there, and also we expect RMB to depreciate, also giving some buffer. But besides that, if we think about U.S.-China relations in general, we have a framework that to think the relations from four aspects. Trade is definitely one important aspect, but besides that, we are also thinking about technology tensions, capital market, as well as geopolitics. So we do not exclude any other restrictions or tensions in other areas, although the market focuses more on trade because for the trade tension, we have a certain period that the tension has already been low. But over the past few months, given Trump is taking the office, definitely people are focusing more and more on the trade tension. We introduced a barometer to measure how much the market has priced in the tension. For the trade tension, a few months ago, it was around 20. The number is from 0 to 100. 100 is peak level. A few months ago, it was 20. Now it's around 60. So definitely we can see the change. But if we look at the geopolitics, capital market tensions, it's already been high. Over the past years, it's already been around 7 to 90 level. So far, we think companies which are vulnerable to this risk, the market have already given discount in terms of valuation. So that's why from the current valuation level, we think even there's risk, the downside is much smaller than, say, 2 years ago or even earlier.
So trade, tech, geopolitics, capital markets, I mean, all of these things are interrelated and interconnected. But how much do you think the bad news for equities has already been priced in?
Yeah, if we look at the valuation of MSCI China, currently it's trading at 10 times PE. So if we look at over the past 3 years, given the China market has been declining, considering all the domestic macro challenges as well as external ones, so current valuation, if we compare with the historical average, we are close to one standard deviation below historical average already. And if we look at equity risk premium, it's also around 7% to 8%. That has already priced in some geopolitical risk, given the trade tension began since 2018. So many related companies, including tech-related companies, if we look at U.S. investors holding in them, it's already declined. So that's why if we look at the current valuation level, we think it can be well supported by fundamentals. We forecast earnings of MSCI China to be 7% next year and 10% in 2026. So considering a 10 times PE, the PAC ratio is only around 1 time. So if we compare the valuation across global markets, China is also the market with almost the lowest valuation among major markets. So that's why at the current valuation level, we do think the downside looks quite limited. But if considering potential tariff risk, currently we are factoring around 20% tariff hike. If, say, say it's 60%. Of course, we don't think it's that likely, but if that's the case, of course, we are still expecting around 10% valuation downside from the current level.
Right, so quite a lot of bad news already has been priced in. We'll have more with Sifu, China portfolio strategist at Goldman Sachs. With us is Sifu, China portfolio strategist at Goldman Sachs. Si, great to have you back with us on the program. You mentioned earlier on that the bottom sort of looks like it's been priced in, but what about the upside potential, and how dependent is this on the timing of stimulus? When might we potentially see this? Do we have to wait until Trump's inauguration or the NPC, or even until after tariffs are actually announced?
Yeah, if we look at next year's outlook, actually, besides the U.S.-China relation, and another important factor is domestic policies. So since September 24th, people generally agree that the policy tone is pretty clear, that the government introduced a more comprehensive package to ease the policies and support the consumption demand side. So what the equity market investors are focusing on is more on the fiscal side, especially on consumption, how much boost or stimulus we may expect. So far, the market is basically trading on announcements, all the policy announcements, and with some hope that all the policies will become effective and could boost consumption and the investor confidence. And looking into 2025, definitely we think what is more important is how much concrete measure we can get. The other thing is how effective it could be, especially people focusing on like consumption data, inflation data, whether it will show some improvements. That will be quite crucial for 2025. So far, if we look at the market, the valuation is already low, given the recent correction in October, that the market is pricing in some uncertainty from the U.S.-China relations. But at the current level, we do think there's some upside that can be driven by more policy easing and more fundamental improvements. So what we are looking forward to is, one, if we can see more concrete measure, especially on how to boost consumption, whether there could be more coupons or subsidies issued, besides the trade-in program is expected to continue. And other than that, people are also expect to see some fundamental improvement, both from the company side, also from the macro side, if we can see some improvement in inflation and also consumer confidence, that will be also helpful to the equity market performance.
What about some of the headwinds for stock markets? I mean, we've been seeing, I guess, competition in a way because of the preference for Chinese bonds, the yuan depreciation, also another risk for stock markets. How closely are you watching at those factors? And I think as we're speaking, the yield on the 10-year is at a record low in China.
Yeah, if we look at the monetary policy, definitely it's on the easing side. So we are still expecting the interest rate to continue being cut for next year. I mean the policy rate, and also we may also expect further RR cut. But I think for the equity investors, definitely people are focusing more on the fiscal policies rather than monetary policy. But what may come wrong, or what may give more pressure to the equity market, is if the effectiveness is proven to be weaker than expected, then the equity market investor may get more disappointed. So fundamental improvements is still very important for next year. Currently, we are focusing 70% earnings growth for MSCI China, 10% for CSI 300. Definitely, we need to have inflation improvement, consumption improvements to support that. So that is what we think would be needed to have a more sustainable rally in the equity market.
So you've just been recently to Hong Kong or mainland China. What was the top question that you were hearing, or the top of feedback that you got from clients as well on that trip?
Yeah, a lot of the discussion, of course, is on the potential tariff impact, which is not surprising. There's a lot of uncertainty. People are guessing how much the tariff could be. Our base case assumption is 20%. Some investors may expect 30 to 40% tariff hike, but definitely most investors do think 60% is unlikely, quite unlikely. So that is discussion around the potential tariff impact, how much it may have on valuation, on earnings, and of course, currency is another aspect that it may influence. If we are having higher level of tariff hike, then RMB may depreciate more, especially for China offshore listed companies that may cause a translation loss. So these are the discussion about U.S.-China relations, but domestically, people are also discussing about policies, especially property policies is one of the focus. And another thing is people also looking at on the consumption side, how much we can get. So these are the key questions we get so far.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to actually ask about the consumption front. Given the amount of uncertainty that we've got over the coming months, do you think this time next year the Chinese consumer is in better shape than it is today? And what exactly are you expecting there?
Yeah, we do think there are some necessary conditions for consumer confidence to be boosted. One is the property market stabilization. Our expectation is the property price could be stabilized later next year, so that may give some fundamental support to consumer. The other thing is we think if we look at household wealth, definitely over the past year, households have accumulated some excessive saving. So consumption power is not a big question, but it's more about confidence. So definitely if there's more policies, including improve like insurance, including healthcare coverage, including cutting some tax. This kind of like policies will also be helpful to boost consumer like appetite as well as confidence. So we do think besides subsidy provided, coupons provided, other policies that may reboost the confidence would also be important.
All right, that was at Sifu there, China portfolio strategist at Goldman Sachs.
那关于房价呢，他认为明年晚些的时候会止跌企稳。关于关税呢，他认为大概是20%，不大可能是60%。关于股市，他认为主要看政府的这个政策能否打破通缩吧。关税的影响呢，相对来说没那么大。总的来说呢，高盛还是相对乐观的啊。好，这次的分享呢就到这里，谢谢大家。